I've legally opened dozens upon dozens of bank accounts in countries all over the world on multiple continents for both myself and for numerous different businesses in different jurisdictions. There are some that were great and there were some that weren't so great. Today I'm going to give you the countries where I had the most difficulty with my real world experience, where the service was often the worst, and the places that I think might be worth avoiding. So here's how I would break it down. How do you determine a bad bank? How do you determine a bad country for banking? Because they're not always the same. There have historically been good banks in countries that people would be like, what are you talking about? And obviously, in a place like the United States, you've had thousands of banks, I believe, over the years have failed. And so people believe in banking in the United States, but there's been plenty of poorly capitalized banks. And so you could have just a bank that offers no value, or a jurisdiction where the banks together just don't offer that much value. You can have a bank that just won't open an account for you. Okay, there's nothing new about that. But you can have a jurisdiction where the kind of ongoing policy is not to open accounts for certain types of people or for non-residents. Again, nothing entirely wrong with that, but if it's laid out to be a place where you can go and it never works, that's an issue. Banks that are simply difficult, lots of paperwork, snotty attitudes, and then just bad service where you get the account open and it's just hard to use. They don't really want to help you. I'm Andrew Henderson. I founded a company called Nomad Capitalist. We've helped over 1,000 high net worth individuals. Over the last decade, we've got a whole team of experts from around the world who help people legally reduce their taxes, increase their freedom with bank accounts, second passports, all done legally, grow their opportunities overseas. You can invest in more up-and-coming places. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com about what we do. So let's start with, where do you just not get a lot of value? So for me, one of the big offshore banking hubs, a lot of the offshore banks, let's say in the Caribbean, have moved to Puerto Rico. It's more straightforward to get a license. You don't have to look for a correspondent bank in the United States because you're in the United States. It's kind of the bane of all the offshore banks. And so especially these kind of tiny little banks in little Caribbean islands often have a hard time functioning in the world. So a lot of these offshore banks move to Puerto Rico. I haven't seen the value in most of them. There's a couple that are decent. We've experimented with a number of them. There's some that specialize in kind of unique trade finance kind of stuff. But for the average person as a deposit account, you're in a U.S. territory but have no FDIC insurance. They can't deal with Puerto Ricans, so you've got to be outside. Just not as good of a deal with all these kind of offshore banks in the Caribbean, which I probably in many cases would have avoided them in the first place. Now they just moved to Puerto Rico. Banks, if you move to Puerto Rico for the tax incentives, one of the complaints people have, and if you live in Puerto Rico for the tax incentives, you just suck it up. But having a substantial bank account in Puerto Rico to do the Act 60, those banks are slow. I mean, Puerto Rico, the Caribbean, it is slow. The Bahamas has one or two good banks. The Caymans has some good banks. Not all of those are great, but Puerto Rico has been a letdown. Most of the other kind of traditional offshore banks, again, there are exceptions. So the Cook Islands is a good bank. But if you're in like Vanuatu, that's a hard place to get a correspondent account. And so you're relying on the reputation of the jurisdiction. Belize, Vanuatu, not great reputations. They're seen as lower quality offshore financial centers. Many of the offshore financial centers have just basically, boarded up. So Dominica has stopped allowing offshore companies. Other countries in the Caribbean just shut down their banking sectors. So, a lot of those Caribbean islands. St. Lucia's okay. That may be one of the better reputations in the Caribbean for banking. There aren't that many banks left there. But a lot of these kind of small upstart banks that don't even operate where they say they're operating, you're going to pay a lot more in fees, and so the value just isn't there. When you can go to a country we talk about a lot, like Georgia, for example, get a bank that has pretty good online banking. It's not quite as good as it used to be, but pretty good online banking. Are there people who are weirded out by receiving money from Georgia? I guess, but I really haven't seen very many problems. It's a real country. It has real banks. They trade on real stock exchanges in the case of a couple of them. That is going to be a lot cheaper in the long run. Even if you have to go there and set it up, you're going to pay normal fees to receive a wire, to send a wire, to transfer currency. Some of these banks that are in offshore islands are going to charge you $100 or like 0.5% of the wire, or God knows how much. It's just crazy what some of these banks charge you. I've got a bank in Singapore, and I feel like they have a fee that I don't know that most of the banks have, but they charge you for this kind of personal account, they charge you $7 to receive a wire. Now, I know plenty of business accounts do that, but I've got a lot of personal accounts where they don't charge you to receive a wire. They charge $7. All right, $7 to bank with one of the strongest banks on earth, I'll take it. $100 to receive a wire in some rickety bank where the office isn't even in the country, pass. Other places where they're just difficult, Estonia comes to mind. People talk about the Estonia e-residence. I'm still seeing people say, come and learn about the benefits of Estonia e-residence. I love Estonia. I love the Estonian people. And I mean, it's a beautiful country. I love the innovation. I love the innovative spirit. I mean, they have done a great job really digitizing things. I love it. But they have the same problem that Hong Kong does, for example, where Hong Kong historically wanted businesses to come, and then banks were like, no, we don't need more money. We got plenty of money. We're too conservative. Leave us alone. Go away. We're busy. And so Estonia didn't get the banks in gear. I mean, that part of the world, Latvia a number of years ago had an issue with the banks where too many Russians were banking there. U.S. central bank didn't like that, pushed the Latvian central bank. And they started really, asking people a lot of questions and making it difficult. A lot of banks ask questions, especially if you're running a business account. What kind of wire is this? For us, we built out a team. We have a finance team. They handle it, and it's just, part of doing business. But Estonia, just very difficult to open an account. Malta, another offshore financial center. Maybe there's a bank or two, but generally speaking, more difficult to open an account. Even for folks who go and get Malta citizenship, it is more difficult. Now, if you have Malta citizenship, you may have access to plenty of other banks in the European Union that are superior. But it's odd, right, that you have a citizenship, you have a home, which is a requirement of getting the citizenship, and you have a hard time opening an account. So in Estonia and Malta, with Estonia being one of the bigger ones. Other places where it's difficult just because it's difficult, and it's probably difficult for some locals too. Colombia, for example, have a home there. Ay, Dios mío. Trying to open an account. There's two banks you can go to. One you'll open and they won't let you bring in any money internationally for 6 months. What a lot of people do when they go to Colombia is they open a brokerage account. They bring their foreign currency and they exchange it in the brokerage account, but it doesn't have the functions of a retail bank. And those brokerage accounts, in my experience, are hard to get in touch with sometimes. I had a guy, I think I had a few bucks in one. I don't even know who my guy is anymore at the brokerage account. And it's such a small amount, I'm like, one day I'll just go and figure it out. But that is a difficult place to get an account. And so thank goodness for Wise. It's relatively restricted to send money into Colombia, but you can still do it. Fortunately, the cost of carrying a property in Colombia is relatively low. I can just bring in cash once a year and I pay my bills up for the year. But banking in Colombia is very difficult. And I don't spend all my time there, so I haven't gone and made it a top priority to figure out, but they are very particular. And it's actually a place where I went in and they're like, who would, we had a guy, he's like, he's retired. Who would retire in Colombia? Okay, so I don't know, the guy sold a business, he's retired, why not? Next door, Panama, not necessarily saying it's hard to open an account, but it's very mercurial. Certain banks will say yes one day, say no the next. You never know exactly what will happen. I'm hearing more people saying that they don't, who are bullish in Panama, saying, don't keep that much money in Panama. So now that they have this kind of higher level golden, red carpet visa and the Panama friendly nations with which they've kind of adjusted, it is more expensive for many folks who want to put money in the bank in Panama. I'm not convinced Panamanian banks either offer the value. They're always asking you lots of silly questions. And I'm not saying banks don't ask questions, but it just seems kind of mercurial. On the service front, two countries I've talked about consistently, I really wish they would work. We've got one bank in Switzerland that we have a good relationship with. Any banks in Switzerland or similar level countries are going to be very picky about who they take. So if you're living in some emerging country, because it's a low tax or you just like the lifestyle, they are going to be very difficult with you. There's a certain snobbery in some of these high-level banks. So Switzerland has that. I've messaged Swiss banks, and they're like, where do you live? And I'm like, I think at the time I was living in Georgia. And they're like, we don't take Americans. And I'm like, it's a country. You're from Poland. You were the first country that had flights to Georgia, like from the West. You've probably heard of Georgia. Like, we're friends, right? Polish and Georgians are friends historically. And then it's like, here's the amount. So I'm like, okay, sure. It's like, no, it's 10 times that amount. And I'm like, is this a joke? I mean, I've just historically found that to be the case in Switzerland. We've got one bank which is particular, but they do a nice job for folks who get in. Liechtenstein, I mean, the service was just historically slow. people complain it's hard to get their money out. There's banks that are, oh, it's crypto friendly, and then people have a hard time. So I really would like to find more banks in Switzerland and Liechtenstein that cooperate, but they're very particular about your nationality. They're very particular about where you live, where your tax home is. They don't want Americans. In one case, they don't even want former Americans. And it's just, you have all this to get this private banking where, quite frankly, I do think that a lot of people who made their money in something that is not known to the Swiss banker are kind of looked down on. All right? It's like, listen, if you have $50 million and you're putting that money in the bank, right, so what? So the guy's nouveau riche, what do you care? Many of them, they really care. And so if you're the kind of person who comes to Nomad Capitalist and you want us to create and execute your holistic plan, and you're someone who just kind of became wealthy through your own hard work in the last 5, 10, 20 years, you may not feel as comfortable in Switzerland as you may in, let's say, Singapore, for example, where banking is a bit more transactional. There's a bit less judgment, right? One thing I've heard from folks who do bank in Switzerland is, lots of structured product sales. It's private banks has invested a bunch of stuff that we make a bunch of money on. They run their own funds in many cases. They often, and I had the same problem in another European private bank outside, where they don't even understand how to avoid U.S. estate tax on certain what are called U.S. cited assets. And you're giving them millions of dollars, and they're giving you an attitude. And they don't even understand the tax stuff they claim to understand. And then they go and research it for 3 months and come back with the wrong answer. So just really, I would love to say I'm impressed because I love the idea. But that's one thing. If you're making a holistic plan, which I think you need, because especially if you're an American, no matter where you're from, if you're going to be banking offshore, you've got to understand the tax consequences at home so that you don't get in trouble and you follow the rules. I am the goody two-shoes of the offshore world after all. And so you want to understand the consequences at home. You want to understand the consequences overseas. You want to understand if you get a residence permit or you get a citizenship or what impact where you live or what citizenship you have has on that bank account, where are you going to move the money, where are your investments. We had someone who wanted to do a bunch of investing in the Middle East. Having a bank account, in certain parts of the world, they're going to freak out when they see that. Having a bank account in Dubai, having a bank account in certain Swiss banks, certain places, they're going to be much more understanding of that. So this is why you need to have a holistic plan. Most people who are looking for asset protection legally overseas should not just be looking at bank accounts. And so there's many other things you can consider. If you're going to be putting money in banks overseas, you might want to look at, hey, I can get a Portugal golden visa just by putting a bunch of money in the bank. Is the opportunity cost too high for that though, right? Or can I get a golden visa in Latvia by buying some kind of bank product? Or are there other places I can get residence or citizenship by putting money in the bank? So if you're looking to diversify, I would say take this as far as it can go. These are places where I've had trouble. I'm not saying that they're places that you should totally avoid. We do send, as I said, people to Switzerland to bank every once in a while. We don't generally send people to the other places, although occasionally if someone has just a very small amount of money for an offshore company in the British Virgin Islands, they don't have many choices, especially if they're accepting payments in cryptocurrency, for example, than to bank in some bank in Dominica. But this is where, to me, if you're looking to protect your assets, especially as an American, you want to have a holistic plan. It's what we do at Nomad Capitalist. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. And those are my experiences over the years with the banks that have frustrated me. Feel free to add your experience in the comments below.